Welcome to the Hashimoto's Doctor podcast. You're now part of a growing community of people determined to take their health back through education and self-empowerment. But because of the healthcare system today, we don't have access to the types of healthcare that we want. So we have to do things differently. We've got to do things smarter, and we do that by becoming our own advocates. This podcast will give you the perspective and thoughts of one of the world's leading Hashimoto's doctors. So let's get started. Hey everyone, Dr. Shook here. I hope you're doing well today. In today's podcast, we're going to do part two of our discussion of iodine, iodine deficiencies, insufficiencies, and its relationship to thyroid-related issues. In particular, we're going to be talking about hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. And I wanted to break this into two parts because I've just, our last podcast, it got a little bit more in-depth and lengthy than I wanted to be. And I try to keep these to about 10 minutes for you guys. So what I want to do is just continue that discussion. If you haven't listened to it, go back. It's really important to understand that our general conversation is surrounding around iodine and the fact that there's evidence that it's high intakes of iodine and low intakes of iodine are associated with hypothyroidism. So what you have to do is understand that there are some nuances and things that need to be considered when you're looking at, do you need iodine or not? If you do need iodine, you've got to make sure that you're taking some other minerals with it. I am a big advocate of testing to figure out what your needs are, and I'll discuss that in a little bit more detail with you as we go through this. But that's really what our whole discussion is revolving around, is like, do you need iodine? If you do, how do you do it, so that you have a less chance of having some kind of negative or adverse reaction to it, okay? So, because you definitely need it, but it's like, how do you do it right? Because we know that high intake can create problems, low intake is a problem. So there have been a lot of different studies done over, like longitudinal studies looking at the whole population. There was the NANES study, which is a study that was basically, they were looking at public health, and they were looking at a large population. This was data from the NANES, is the National Health and Nutritional Examination Surveys. So these have been done since, I think, the 70s. Like the first NANES one was 1971 to 74. And they've looked at studies over time, and they saw that they measured those levels. They gathered a lot of data, a lot of nutritional data. They looked at iodine levels in that first study. And they continue to gather the same information so they can see how does the nutritional values change over time. And so iodine was one of the things that they measured. And when they compared NANES 1 to NANES 3, which was 1988 to 1994, they saw that there was a significant decrease in urine iodine concentrations, which is a way that we really measure the need for iodine. That's one of my favorite ways to do it, is to look at a 24-hour urinary collection and see how much iodine are you excreting. And they noticed that from NANES 1, which was in the early 70s, to NANES 3, which was late 80s, early 90s, that the urinary iodine excretion had dropped 50%, by half. And this is a potential problem, but what they noticed in NANES 4, which was 2001 to 2002, was that it seemed that those levels of iodine excretion had stabilized through the population. So there was this dip, and now there seems to be a stabilization. Now, I don't know if the NANES studies are continuing. I hope they are. But I need to look into that to see what's happened since 2001 and 2002, because significant amount of time has passed now. I'm sure we've probably got some other studies. I'd really be interested to know kind of what the trends are now, because I can tell you that clinically, when I work with people, a lot of people primarily I work with people that have Hashimoto's and autoimmune thyroid condition, and or hypothyroidism is usually layered in there, and Hashimoto's is the leading cause of hypothyroidism. And what I find in my population of the people that I work with is that a lot more of them are iodine deficient than ever before. And I'm really, and I'm not an advocate of high dose iodine at all. I mean, you've got to do it right, and that's what I want to discuss with you a little bit more here. But it's very interesting to see now that people are going on these specialized diets, and they're restricting all their iodine. And I think that you've got to be very careful at how you do that. Because I think that could be a bad thing. And, there are studies that have shown that restricting iodine, specifically restricting it, has helped people with Hashimoto's become and become euthyroid again with normal thyroid hormone levels. But iodine is essential for thyroid hormone production, like essential for a lot of physiological processes, and you've got to have it. So, you've got to have some iodine in your diet. You just have to make sure you have other minerals with it. I think you have to do it at a reasonable level. And I think you really need to get tested. You really need to have that. That needs to be something that's tested. And I prefer, I know a lot of people do testing different ways, but I prefer urinary iodine excretion tests where we can look at 24 hours. Or, if I'm really limited, it depends sometimes on people I'm working with. We have a limited, we can't do the same testing. It's limited, so we'll do like a urinary spot check, which is just like collected at one point in time and see what the levels are like. It's not my favorite way to do it, but I like the urinary excretion 24-hour collection if we can. But I think this is really important to understand, right? You got to do it right. So it's interesting when you look at different people with different diets. Iodine insufficiencies in vegetarians and vegans are they're more common than they are in people with mixed diets, right? There's a study done that was, a 2003 Annals of Nutrition and Metabolism, and it was titled Iodine Deficiency in Vegetarians and Vegans. And it's really interesting because when they looked at it, they basically found that about 25% of vegetarians, okay, so about 1 in 4 vegetarians and about 80% of vegans had iodine deficiency, where they were, and that was measured, the way they defined that was iodine excretion, so their urinary excretion of iodine was below 100 micrograms per liter. And this is compared like in the mixed diet population, it was about 9% of people that were deficient. So these diets predispose them to, here's the proposed connection, right? You can't necessarily say for sure that's what it is, but the proposed connection is that this consumption of food that was lower, or no, I should say no intake of fish or other seafood based products, and then transitioning primarily to like a sea salt based diet, right? So, or sea salt based consumption of salt with sea salt, not iodized salt, resulted in a reduction of iodine intake as a whole. That's the proposed mechanism through which it occurs. And when I think of vegetarians, sometimes I work with people with a lot of different dietary restrictions and preferences, and it becomes very challenging when you cannot eat meat. Sometimes I'm very hesitant to. I've worked with a few vegetarians. I've worked with fewer vegans, just because it's very difficult for me to, based on the toolbox and the things that I have and that I know, to help people that can't consume any meat. If they can be pescatarian, which is like vegetarian plus you can have fish, and that's a little bit, that tends to be, I think, a better balance for us because we can get enough iodine in those cases. You can always supplement with iodine. I mean, that's how primarily what I do. I do supplement with it. I'll talk about that in just a second. But it's really important to understand that it's really important to understand this too, that a lot of people can consume tons of iodine and have no problems with it. Like, that's really important to understand. Like, there are a lot of people that can just consume massive amounts of iodine and they have no problems. They take it in their diet. They eat like lots of seafood and kelp, and kelp can have massively varied degrees of iodine within it, and so you can get massive amounts, and some people have no problem, and most people don't have any issues. But where it really creates the issue is in people that are vulnerable to thyroiditis or Hashimoto's or autoimmune attacks. And this is, if someone already has a thyroid-based problem, they're more likely to have a risk of developing a reaction or having some type of reaction to excessive thyroid intake or iodine intake. And it seems like that's also the case for the old and the very, very young. So we have to be careful with them. But it's interesting to see this association. Now, why might that be? Why might someone be able to consume so much and not have an adverse reaction? Well, they probably have other antioxidants that are present that are protective against some adverse reactions. If a person consumes high iodine and they don't have any autoimmune mechanisms occurring, that may also be protective, right? If someone's already autoimmune, they're already attacking their thyroid, they're deficient in a lot of antioxidants, they're deficient in minerals like selenium, which is a huge one. Maybe they have depleted glutathione peroxidase, which is a very potent antioxidant that's found throughout the thyroid. This can create lots of problems for people, and this can predispose them to inflammatory processes of the thyroid. At least these are the prevailing and a lot of proposed mechanisms, right? I don't want to say, but listen, everything in healthcare and medicine is pretty much theory. I mean, we've got a good working understanding of it, but and we can observe changes clinically and positive outcomes. But I try to want you guys to know, these are, it's not set in stone here. Everything is always a working understanding of this. So I just want you to know that this is what a lot of people think. These are my opinions too. So I think that's really what I wanted to highlight with you guys there, was just this interesting connection. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is this. I tell people all the time, they ask me about supplementation. So I work with a few people per month one-on-one. I spend a lot of time teaching and researching and studying and doing the things that I'm doing with you guys, and we're trying, I'm constantly trying to think, I'm thinking of ways, how can I change the lives of people with thyroid dysfunction and these major issues with their health? How can I change that in a massive way on a grand scale? Well, I can't do that as easily by working with people one-on-one. So I do work with people one-on-one. I used to do that a lot. Now we are much more limited in our one-on-one approach. I work with people, 2 to 4 people per month. That's it. And I can only have time. We have to restrict it because I don't have the time day to day to do the follow-ups and everything with, having a full, huge practice. If we do that, it limits me in my other, the other things that I want to accomplish, like trying to create programs and simplify things and create educational materials. So I work with a very few people one-on-one, 2 to 4 per month. And I only work with people that get very extensive testing simply because of the fact I don't have time to work through the trial and error. So we have to dig and dig deep. And a lot of people ask me, so I've worked with a lot of people, and I have a lot of communication with thousands and thousands of people in our groups, and a few 100,000 people plus that follow us on social media, and we get lots of questions. My point here is that a lot of people ask us about supplementation, and they've got all these vitamins and supplements, and it's a huge market, obviously. I mean, I utilize nutritional supplements every day with people, and they're incredibly beneficial and powerful tools. However, I am very cautious as to what supplement brands I recommend, because there's so much variability, and so many of the supplements are not standardized. I mean, there was a study that was done in 2009. This was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the most prestigious journals in medicine, and it was iodine content of prenatal multivitamins in the United States. And listen, long story short here, they were highly variable, highly variable. These were this was 25 different brands containing iodine that was derived from kelp. They had a greater than 50% discrepancy between the measured and labeled values. Okay, this is crazy. Okay, and these varied significantly. So the measured values were anywhere from 33 to 610 micrograms per daily dose, and they were labeled like. This one was labeled with 150 micrograms. So you thought you were getting 150 micrograms, but you might have been getting smacked with 610, which is, listen, the American Thyroid Association recommends that people not consume iodine or kelp containing greater than 500 micrograms of iodine per day for all individuals, right? So you might be getting your supplements. If you listen, I only recommend very few supplements. And when I work with people one-on-one, I'm like, you know what? I'm glad that you've been trying to help yourself and that you've got like 40 supplements in your cabinet, but you're going to have to stop taking all those, and you're going to have to use the ones that I recommend, because I don't know what your supplements contain. Like, I utilize supplementation from companies that have very strict standardization processes, and I know I believe and know what's in there is in there, and I've used those supplements with people clinically, and we get more predictable results. The last thing I'm going to do is work with someone and not be able to get predictable. We need to control as many variables as possible. There's already 1,000 things that can contribute to the problems that you're having, so we want to be as controlled as we possibly can. Okay, as controlled as we possibly can in our in what we're doing. So, there's a lot of variation in supplementation. I mean, I tell people this. I've said it. I feel like I've said it a lot, but there's a lot of variation. There's a lot of variation. These variations can create a lot of problems for you. Either not enough or too much iodine. So let me tell you what I do. Okay, so I take a multivitamin. The multivitamin that I take has 250 micrograms of iodine per day, and that's probably a little bit on the higher side. But this is what I do, and this is what I think works pretty well, as long as you're not deficient in other antioxidants. So having selenium somewhere between 200, which I think 200 is probably the sweet spot, especially if you're eating it and you're getting it in food as well. As long as you're not over-consuming it in foods, like Brazil nuts have high selenium. You don't want to eat like a lot of those in combination with taking it in a supplement. But there's 200 micrograms of selenium in combination with adequate iodine intake, I think is a beneficial thing to do. That's what I do. Now I can't speak for you and tell you whether or not that's right for you, but I can tell you that clinically we've used approximate amounts, 250 micrograms, like the multivitamin tends to cover the potholes and the needs. So there's 250 micrograms of iodine in the supplement we use, and I think you're probably safer going a little bit lower with that. Might be even a more safe recommendation with iodine. It really depends on what your needs are. I'm telling you what I do, but you need to know your urinary excretion. You need to be tested for your levels. That's why I tell people, like, you're trying to help yourself get healthy. How do you know what's going on if you don't do testing to figure out what to do? I mean, so I work with people one-on-one, and yeah, we get testing, and yes, it's very extensive, and yes, it's not covered by insurance, and yes, you might spend $4,000, or some people that we do, if we get very in-depth immunological based testing, and we do everything, we do genetics based testing, we do a lot. I mean, people spend over $10,000, and a lot of people might gasp at those numbers, but you know what? I'm going to tell you what, it's all relative. I tell people this: you're going to spend it on trying to be healthy now, or you're going to spend it at the end of life dealing with sickness and have a lower quality of life. Those are the more likely scenarios. And I see people that get cosmetic surgery all the time, and they drop that kind of money, and I'm like, you know what? It's all what you prioritize. And so I don't think that there's any problem with it. I mean, you know what? What do you prioritize? You know what? I try to give people different ideas on testing and what they can do. But yeah, you can spend some money doing testing. But how else do you know what to do? Like I don't know what to tell people. Whatever. So I digress again. But you've got to do the testing to figure out what you need to do as an intervention. That's my take. That's the best way to do it. Not everyone has access to that, but you know what? You need, if you want my opinion on what's best to do, it's best to get testing so you can be specific with your interventions. So what I do is I take a multivitamin, 250 micrograms of iodine. It has 200 micrograms of selenium. It may have 250 of selenium. But usually for selenium intake, which is extremely important, I discussed it in my previous podcast, because you produce selenoproteins that help to, like thyroid peroxidase, which is selenium-dependent antioxidant that helps to neutralize inflammatory processes that can be triggered by excessive iodine intake in the thyroid. You have hydrogen peroxide, which is an inflammatory compound that's normal byproduct of thyroid hormone production inside the cells of the thyroid, gets neutralized basically by thyroid peroxidase, which is selenium dependent. So you have to have selenium, right? So you take selenium, you have to have selenium with your, I would say, if I'm going to say one micronutrient with iodine, it's got to be selenium. Right, so there are other things that are very important, like zinc and like other antioxidants as well, which, that's why I like the multivitamin that I use fills in a lot of the nutrient potholes and deficiencies that people tend to have. So really important to understand that. But I hope some of the information that we've gone over here gives you some food for thought and direction on what you might need to consider doing for yourself. And, there's a lot of stuff that I've talked about there, and there are a lot of studies and references that I can share with you guys. But you just, if you need help or you got questions, let me know. But there are a lot of other, I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about 10 different scientific literature references that I've been kind of glancing at as we're going over, as going through this podcast. So I hope, anyway, I think really as far as iodine goes, those are the main things that you need to know, right? You need to just be aware that you need to, it needs to be done based on your individual needs. Your iodine supplementation needs to be done based on your individual needs. If you're utilizing iodine, you really, the literature suggests to us, and my clinical practice and what a lot of other people see in clinical practice strongly suggests that you cannot be deficient in other micronutrients, especially selenium. Okay, especially selenium and other antioxidants, but selenium being one of the most important because of the dependence that your body has upon selenium as a cofactor or to manufacture and produce very important antioxidants like glutathione peroxidase, which helps to neutralize inflammatory processes that may be occurring in the thyroid. So I wanted to share that with you guys. I want to share with you a little bit about what I do, the approach that I take with iodine, and what I think you need to consider is not as straightforward as you might imagine. There are really some things that you have to consider. It's not just as simple as taking iodine. There's a little bit more to it. So I hope this helps you. Remember, it's my goal to help you improve your quality of life. If I can help you, it's going to have a positive impact on your family, your community, and ultimately we'll change the world one person at a time. I want you to be better educated so you can be an active participant in your healthcare. You can be a better partner with your doctor, not an adversary. And you can improve your quality of life. So if you guys have any questions, if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here for you. We'll do everything that we can. But until next time, guys, hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out behind the scenes with Dr. Shook. You can also talk with and learn from Dr. Shook through Facebook Live on our Facebook page at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. Don't forget, you can also get access to our videos, guidebooks, and thyroid programs at www.drbradshook.com. Oh yeah, and don't forget one more thing. We can change the world one person, one family, and one community at a time. Until next time, remember, today is your day, and no one will tell you who you are and what you can be.